Well, we want to welcome you back to another episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And I'm going to right off the bat give some explanation. We have got 43-mile-an-hour wind gusts here. It might be a little dicey internet, might be some noises, might be some dogs going crazy, possibly all of the above. But you know what? We'll stay curious.
Well, I won't tell you how nice it is here in balmy Orlando, Florida today.
Yeah, don't tell me. No, it's welcome to Albuquerque in springtime. I don't know. It's winds here on out, I think is what's going to happen. But as we wait for better weather, that is really our topic for today is how do we wait well? And I think all of us have various things that we're waiting for. We're waiting on answers, we're waiting on results, we're waiting on the next phase of life, whatever the case may be. So how do we stay curious and how do we wait well?
Waiting is not my strong suit. Um, I'll be interested in this discussion. The I, what I tell myself, and it's not entirely true, but you know how our self-talk goes,
Mm-hmm.
is that I would rather go bang against the walls and make mistakes and figure out what not to do while I'm figuring out what to do rather than be still and or plan
Mm,
and or think of productive things I can do while I wait. I
yeah.
want to either know the answer now or I'll just assume it and carry on because I think waiting is unfair. I think waiting is terrible. I think waiting is a bad thing, and I I'm it's not in my personality to wait well.
Waiting is a bad thing. Interesting statement. All right, let's dissect that one a little bit because I think there's a whole lot of training that happens in the waiting. So I'm going to reference the great scholar on these things, Dr. Seuss.
Oh, he's the best.
So this is a book, and I'm holding up to the camera for those of you that are just listening to audio, the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. I got this as a graduation gift from college, and I was at the time working at a daycare center, and all of the kids signed the front of it in their, scribbly little handwriting. But I have forever remembered the two central pages of this book, and I'm going to show it and then I'll explain it for the people that are just listening only. So it's a really dark sky. It's a black sky. It's a bunch of people sitting around waiting. And I'm going to read this because I think this is so apropos and I really want to be curious about these two pages. So it goes like this. Waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or a no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. Waiting for the fish to bite, or waiting for wind to fly a kite, or waiting around for Friday night, or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake, or a pot to boil, or a better break, or a string of pearls, or a pair of pants, or a wig with curls, or another chance. Everyone is just waiting. And then it goes on to say, and I won't keep reading this book, but it goes on to say about what a useless place the waiting place is. And it says, no, somehow you will escape all that waiting and staying, and you'll find the bright places where the boom bands are playing. And I have just forever had this thought process about this waiting place being kind of this purgatory stew pot of folks hanging out there, waiting on whatever they're waiting for, and not doing anything until they reach that goal or till the item transpires or the circumstance changes. And so I want to be curious about this for a minute. And I don't think that's what we're called to do. I don't think that's the best use of our time. And if we are waiting, and in my case, there has been periods of waiting for time for my hair to grow. You know, what do we do to be mindful in the waiting and to be purposeful in the waiting period?
Yeah, and there are obviously productive things to go. Even though I'm not very good at it, I know what to do, right? I mean, we all know what to do. I think if we get out of our little silliness about not liking it, we can say, okay, look, I can study up on this. I can think of other things to do. I can distract myself. I can do other things in the meantime. I We always complain about the fact that we've always got too many plates in the air. Well, I can go spin other plates. There's
True.
lots of things to do while we wait. I think the problem that bugs me the most is that, and I told you over the holidays, I finally broke down and got this thing that captures every task imaginable that pops into my brain, and it's actually working pretty well. But there's a bunch of stuff that you do your part, and then there's a label you can do called waiting,
Mm,
and I have to apply that thing, and then once a week, dutifully go through and look at all my waitings. What am I waiting for other people to do?
interesting.
And it's a pretty frustrating process. And I'll tell you what's frustrating about it is that thing is yet unresolved.
Mm,
So it continues to be one of those nagging, unfinished tasks, the nuts in my brain. And I can only handle so many nuts in my brain before, I become unproductive. And so I think that's the frustration for me is, um, uh, I'm just realizing as I'm saying this, it's because it's out of my control.
mm, yep. I want to share a little story with you, and this is from the faith-based perspective. And so I just preface it with that. So I used to work in Christian radio for many, many years, and I was a radio show host. And I remember this one particular day that this guy had called in, and we had been talking about waiting. And he shared with me this story that has forever been in my mind. And Gary, you have maybe have heard me share this in some other context, but for our greater audience, I'll share it that he had been injured in some sort of a workplace injury, and it was, I think, chemical in nature. He was in the hospital but needed ongoing treatment for his eyes. He had temporarily lost his eyesight. And he was so mad. Like he was just mad at the world, mad at God, mad at everybody, right? That this accident had happened, uncertainty of outcome. He couldn't see to read, he couldn't see to watch TV. So he's just laying in a hospital bed. And so he's telling the story on air. He's recounting the story to us. And he said, I was so angry and I was getting mad. And he said, I was praying about it. And I was wanting an answer from God. And God said, just wait. And he said, and in utter frustration, I threw my hands up. I was like, well, what else am I going to do besides wait? I can't do anything. And then he said, what God's response was to him, he said, oh no, you wait on me like a waiter would wait on his tables. There's service in the waiting. And he said that changed everything for him. And
Mm,
he was in the hospital for however long, weeks to go for this treatment and for his eyesight to be resolved. He said he started a telephone prayer tree kind of a thing, and where he would get on the phone, he could call, or people could call him and he could answer the phone and he would pray with them. And he said that was one of the most fruitful, productive times of his life to date,
mm.
even though he could do nothing but wait. And so that's forever been in my head when I think about people who are languishing in that waiting period.
And service obviously is one of the major things that you can do while you're waiting for your next job, while you're waiting for, you know, um, because it's so healthy because it gets you out of your own head and it gets you out, in his case, out of his anger,
Yep.
right? And anger is not a great place to be, right? And we talked last week about, comparing yourself to others or comparing yourself to the life you think you ought to be, or comparing yourself even to your own expectations and how unfruitful that is. And so, uh, service is an answer to a lot of things, isn't
Mm-hmm. Absolutely is. And, to your point of just getting out of your own headspace, because that waiting can be so exponentially magnified when we just stew and ruminate on whatever the situation is. And, you had asked me just before we began recording this, like, hey, have you gotten your test results back? Right. So, as I've shared, I had a cancer diagnosis over the summer. I'm now in the period of time where I have to go get a PET scan every quarter. And now it's been 2 weeks and I still haven't gotten my results. And I am waiting. And when I'm doing it well, I'm doing all kinds of other things and I'm not thinking about it and I'm just letting it go. When I'm not doing it well and when I'm stuck in my own head, it's when I began to tell myself all the stories of like, oh, great, it's taken so long because they found something and they had to go get a second opinion and this and that. And, it really could be they're just short on technicians and they haven't gotten around to it. But it's in that waiting, we can tell ourselves all kinds of stories, and almost without exception, they're negative stories.
it? And it's that example, like you said, of not being in control too. There's nothing you can do
Yep.
about it. And worrying about it is not going to help one bit, not going
Mhm.
to add one cubit to your height, right? It's
Yep.
just not going to work. And so, You know, okay, so we've asked the question, we've talked about a little bit of our frustrations with waiting, but how, and we've talked about service as a way to wait well.
Hmm.
Is there is there other things we can do to wait well?
Well, I think it does tie back into service, but just to be intentional about relationship with others and just even in that thought process, that could be a service act. And, maybe you're not necessarily doing anything for somebody. Maybe you're not grocery shopping for them or pulling weeds in their yard, but just being intentional about reaching out to someone else and hearing their stories and sharing in their life. I think it is a simple act of service, but again, one that gets you out of your own head and puts you into space and relationship with somebody else.
My youngest daughter, recently drove from Florida to North Carolina, so she had a choice. She could break it up into 2 days, and early on, so I think that was her first phone call,
Mhm.
but she decided to make a bunch of phone calls, and in that phone call, I said, you have a lot of people you need to catch up with, as we all
Mhm.
do. Let's brainstorm a list and let's reach out. And she, at the end of the day, she decided to drive straight through because she was having such exciting, great conversations. It made the
Mhm.
time go by. As you said about your friend, one of the most productive days in her life in service to others by just calling people and catching up with old friends and saying, "How are you?"
Yeah.
And working on those relationships. We all claim we don't have enough time. Well, if we took the time that we spent stewing and not
Mhm.
waiting well and picked up the phone and called somebody, that might be one of the ways to wait well.
Yeah. And I think another thing that we really have to be mindful of in that waiting space is just to be intentional about our mindset. And so this last weekend, I was at a conference on the border. I was in El Paso, like on the border. And that's possibly a whole other podcast that we can talk about because I saw some really astonishing things. But one of the speakers who was part of the lineup of speakers was a woman who had, she admitted she had come over illegally with her children. Her children were in need of medical care. So she was caught and deported, and the children were still in the US, are still in the US getting medical care. So she has been removed from her children for now, I think it's been several years. And I can only imagine the agony of what that is. And so one would say, well, she just has to wait to be reunited, however, in whatever form that's going to take. But, especially in a situation like that where it is so like it is literally, families divided. How do you shift your mentality so that you stay sane, that you stay in hope, that you can even approach the concept of joy in the midst of separation and the agony of waiting? And so she has thrown herself into helping immigrants and asylum seekers that are coming to the border on the Mexico side. So she has been networking churches. She has been trying to find resources for people, trying to find places for them to go, food, clothing, shoes, the whole nine yards, and thrown herself into helping people that are in a worse circumstance than herself. And she has just had to be very intentional about shifting her mindset. And I heard that and I thought, for me to complain about my 2 weeks of waiting for a test result, man, I need a shift of perspective.
Yeah. And we can always use that perspective. And I think that that's one of the useful things about comparing our situation to others, because there's not a whole lot of them.
Right.
But when you start thinking about how people are getting through much worse things than we are
Yeah.
and waiting well, it's a good motivator for us to maybe think better. And one of the things my wife always says to me is, "Well, think better."
Mm,
you know, it's like, well, I'm thinking this, and she goes, "Yeah, think better."
I like
And
that.
it's a challenge. It's a good and it's a loving challenge.
Yeah.
And there's probably, I'll bet you could be a little bit more creative in your frustration, and you come up with this, but you probably give it a couple more seconds of thought. We sometimes we throw up our hands. This is terrible, and there's nothing I can do. And this is, waiting is terrible. Waiting is the worst thing ever, like I said earlier in the podcast.
Mhm.
But is it? And what can we learn in the waiting? What can we do by not especially for personalities like myself who just want to lunge into everything
Yeah.
and start doing. There are times when waiting is probably the most appropriate thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think you just asked a question that we failed to address from the get-go, like what is your mentality about waiting? And if you have a very negative connotation about around waiting, you said, well, waiting is bad. But then I think the curious question is it? Is waiting bad? And kind of walking down the five why questions. Well, why do you think it's bad? And then you come to that answer, why? And then that answer, why? Kind of narrow it down. And if your bottom answer is because I'm not in control of the situation, is that a bad thing, right? And to begin to really go down that curious pathway to get to that place of resolve of, okay, I am in a place where I am not in control. I cannot manipulate the situation. I cannot do anything about the circumstance. So what can I do with myself, my mentality, and with the people that I am in community with?
And what and how can I direct my own thoughts? A lot of this comes back to, and one of the things that I know you and I are constantly trying to do better on is how do we direct our own thoughts?
Hmm.
How do we direct them away from negativity and things that are just not useful and toward things that make our lives and those around us better? How can we be more intentional about that?
Yeah. Well, and I just am thinking, even in this conversation, as it tends to happen, we have these conversations, and I think about, oh, yeah, I could do this. As we all have our respective places of waiting, whether it is in a health issue, on a health issue, maybe you're waiting for a job, you're waiting for whatever it is that you're waiting for. Do you know someone else in a similar circumstance? And how can you serve as a voice of encouragement? Not to call and commiserate with them, not to let that be an amplified, you know, series of voices that spins you deeper and deeper into that dark place of thinking. But how could you serve as an encouragement to someone else going through something similar? Do you know someone else who's looking to find a job, and can you send them a note of encouragement, or can you commit to help keep an eye out for things that might fit their skill set? If you're waiting on medical tests or waiting on treatment plans or whatever, do you know someone else who's going through some health issues, and can you reach out to them with a word of encouragement, or put together a little care package for them? I think just being intentional to think about others who are in the same space, again, not to compare, but just to be mindful. And then are there those things that we can do to wait well and help someone else in the process?
And also on that intentionality, yes, thinking about others and performing acts of service are great. And while you're doing that, that's great. If you're still being, a sourpuss in the times that you're not doing that, what effect is that having on people and on your overall psyche? Somebody just sent me a TED talk this morning on the cycles, right? And the guy calls it the toilet cycle,
Mm,
where you're in a bad mood and then you start affecting other people's bad mood and then they affect you back and it goes down the toilet, right? In that
yep.
cycle. Or he calls it the cheesy happy cycle, which is where you are happy and you have a positive attitude, which has a positive effect on other people, and then that in turn comes back to you and you have an upward spiral. And so as we are waiting and we're starting our spiraling, which spiral are we going to start? Right?
Mm,
Are we going to start the toilet spiral, or are we going to start the cheesy happy spiral? And sometimes it feels like, and you've heard the phrase "fake it till you make it." It sometimes feels like, well, I'm being fake when I do this, or I'm not really expressing how I really feel. Well, there's times for that,
sure.
but there's also times, especially if you feel like you're on the toilet spiral, where you think, you know what, I can jump off this at any time. I can be nicer to people. I can have a more positive attitude. I can do little acts of service, sure, but even in the meantime, especially with those who love me and those who are close to me, those who I interact with, I can be more pleasant. I can
Yeah.
be that person who starts the cycles for other people.
Hmm. Well, I think this touches on, just the importance of gratitude again. And if you find yourself going on that downward spiral, can you stop yourself in your tracks and really be intentional about grasping the things that you are grateful for and begin to kind of build a laundry list of those positive attributes so that you can, reverse course on your spiral and start going upwards?
Yeah, and gratitude is always a good place to be. So service is always good. Gratitude is always good. Thinking about which place you're spiraling from or to
Hmm.
is always good. So I think we've come up with some good things that I'm already starting to think about how I could apply that to a couple of places in my life where I'm waiting. Um, the other one that is that's interesting is, do you have certain people in your life that you can call or interact with that can get you out of that? Can you
Mm,
ask for help?
yeah.
That's the one that, and we've touched on this a couple of times, but it's not one of my strengths. I usually try to power through and fix things on my own. But there's always experts in any given area that can help us at
Yeah.
any time. There, and even if it's that person that is the cheesy happy person who every time you call and it's like, oh my God, I got to hear how happy this person is. How can he be so happy? Aren't they living the same life I am? you know
Yeah.
but reaching out to some of those people to help reverse your spiral, and reaching out for help in general,
Yeah.
even if, and especially if it's serious, but if you can just reach out for help, to someone that is going to lift your spirits, even if they're not intending to.
Hmm.
Even if it's somebody that just as you talk to them, it helps you process,
Yeah.
right? So reaching out for help, I think, is also a good thing to add to the list.
I think that's absolutely right. And so I would love for folks to weigh in. What are some of the things that you have found to be helpful while you wait? I know there's some practical kind of what do they call them? Interrupters, when you do some physical exercise, it depends on the duration of the wait, of course. If you've got a week long wait, maybe it's different things that you do than a month long wait, etc. But, what are some of those interrupters to that wait cycle that you can be intentional to do so that you kind of break that negative thinking, you get out of that downward spiral? Would love to hear some folks and their ideas on that. So curiosity.judgment.com is always a great place to reach out to us. If you just scroll down on the page, there's a contact us form. Just drop us a line right there. I think that would be excellent to start building that list, and maybe we can send that out somehow and just have it be a word of encouragement and reminder for all of us that inevitably get stuck in waiting in some circumstance or another, and just to have that list top of mind.
All right, well, here's to waiting well.
Indeed. All right. Well, until next time that we get to see each other in person, I hope you have a great rest of your time in Florida, and we'll catch up again soon.
All right, take care.
Thanks.